Talk to Noah Manyika and his small little party. Get him off the ballot box. Talk to Jacob Garivume. What I'm saying is, don't be arrogant and say these guys are small. They don't matter. They matter in terms of psychology of the people. They matter in terms of plausible rationale for rigging. Don't be insecure towards Kosana because his resume is very big. Talk to Kosana. Don't be insecure to other people. But more importantly, don't be arrogant. Douglas Munzora, that one is tricky. Talk to him, but that one is a creation of ZANU-PF. So whether you succeed or not, I don't know. But give him the benefit of the doubt and talk to him. But I'm very skeptical because he's a creation of the regime. Why would he participate in the destruction of the regime? Message. Please understand the strategic value of unity. It's not about adding the votes of your supporters. It's about the psychology of the country. It's about the mobilizing impact of unity. It's about removing the plausible rationale for rigging. So MDC Alliance, you are the opposition. We respect you. Talk to everybody. Don't be arrogant. Don't be insecure. Good luck with Douglas Munzora. But talk to him. Now, the securocratic government is embarked on a very terrible strategy of destroying the opposition, in particular MDC Alliance. They've created their own party, the MDCT, which is both inept and intellectually bankrupt. They also have no social base. Unfortunately, the fight between MDCA and MDCT can only be settled by a national election. We will see whether MDCT can keep those ill-gotten MPs. It has to be settled through an election or by elections, but the national election will be the answer to this. What needs to be done? What do we need to do to make sure that history does not repeat itself in Zimbabwe? We must have political reforms in the country to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. We must understand how rigging is done. That's why Professor Moyo's presentation is very important. Understand the points, the areas where rigging is done, and then come up with a mechanism to undo it so that we can have free, fair, and credible elections. And some of the political reforms might require constitutional amendments. You know, it's very cynical. ZANU-PF is very cynical. We've been calling for political reforms. They are doing the opposite. They are creating political reforms to safeguard rigging. They're carrying out political reforms to ensure that rigging is protected. No, we need the reverse. We need political reforms to enable and allow free, fair, and credible elections, not constitutional amendments to enable and safeguard rigging of elections. We have a challenge. The opposite is being done. What we want, the opposite is being done. What do we mean by political reforms? Reforms to improve democracy, reforms to deepen democracy, reforms to expand the democratic space so that we can have free, fair, transparent, and credible elections. We want professionalism, transparency, integrity, and independence in the management of our elections. These reforms, we must work towards them before 2023 so that we can avoid history repeating itself in 2023. All stakeholders must agree and implement this. Implementation is the problem. It's one thing to have a law or have a rule. Let's make sure it is implemented so that we can guarantee undisputed poll outcomes, so we can resolve the perennial polarization due to stolen or rigged elections. We must overhaul ZEC. The structure of ZEC must change. The nature of appointment of members must change. The independence of ZEC must be guaranteed. Let us copy South Africa. Let us look at IEC in South Africa. Let us professionalize ZEC and pick up lessons from South Africa's IEC. The appointment of the ZEC chairperson must not be done by the president. Mnangagwa must not appoint ZEC chairperson. We must overhaul the entire electoral system. For example, why don't you have 100% PR? All of them, Senate and Parliament, PR. And guess what? The big parties like MDC Alliance and ZANU-PF might not like this one. Because big parties are the beneficiaries of lack of PR. But PR is good for democracy. This is why, again, a major emphasis in my presentation is this struggle in Zimbabwe must be owned by civil society. This struggle in Zimbabwe must be owned by ordinary people, because sometimes the political parties have vested interests. So it will take civil society to say, we want 50-50 gender parity. We want 100% PR. Civil society, the women, the youth are the ones who can drive this agenda. And you might have to change the constitution to get 50-50 gender parity. Election management system, transparent limitation exercise. This must happen if we're going to avoid history repeating itself. Media reforms, access to media, campaigns, election environment. Those 5 stages that Professor Moyo spoke about, they require effective reforms. They require media reforms. They require political reforms. And by the way, you might need constitutional amendments to make this happen, or you might just need an ordinary act of parliament. Go figure it out, people of Zimbabwe. But we need reforms to make sure our elections are free, fair, and credible, to make sure that history does not repeat itself.
Professor Mutambara.
Okay. Okay. I'm still on time. People power. We must make sure that we use people power in addition to lawfare. We can't just stick to the law. We must seek to also ensure that the route and destination of our election results are guaranteed, and the fidelity of our results. Okay? We must defend the vote. We must dismantle ZEC. We must make sure that we identify the rigging enablers, individuals and institutions, and also make sure that we deploy agents. Professor Moyo has spoken about this. 985 wards, 210 constituencies, 10 provinces. We must make sure we attend to the institutionalized rigging, which is done by ZEC. What we need to do in summary, massive voter registration, massive voting, and number 3, defending the vote. There's no point in registering to vote if you don't vote. There's no point in voting unless you can defend the vote. Heavy voter registration, massive turnout will make it difficult to rig elections. Okay? And these are the strategies we must carry out, but civil society must be the standards. And I must emphasize, Chris, this one here, the limitations of law. Don't get carried away by going to court. In the liberation struggle, there was only one case, the Mazimba Muto versus Randenberg, 1969, which went up to the Privy Council, which was challenging the legality of UDI, the legality of Ian Smith. The judges in Zimbabwe said Smith was legal. The Privy Council said Smith was illegal, but the regime ignored it. Thereafter, the freedom fighters never went to court to ask for votes, never went to court to ask for justice. In South Africa, legal action against apartheid in apartheid courts. You can't do that. Now, ED and ZANU-PF have to decide. Are they keen to create Smith and apartheid courts in Zimbabwe? Are they keen to create illegitimate courts, illegal courts in Zimbabwe? If they do that, we are not coming to your illegal courts for justice. We will not go to court when you have illegal courts and illegitimate courts. We will learn from Zipra and Zanla forces. They did not go to court to ask for the vote from Ian Smith. Tongo Gara and Chitepo, Nikita Mangena and Jason Ziapa did not go to court to ask for the vote from Ian Smith. The MK and APLA fighters in South Africa, Chris Hani and Joe Slovo, did not go to court to ask for freedom. So if the courts in Zimbabwe are illegitimate, if the courts in Zimbabwe are illegal, we are not coming there. The law has its limitation. I don't know where we're going to go. And I'm not going to tell you where we're going to go, but definitely we're not going to go to the courts which are illegitimate. So we need to make a decision as ZANU-PF and ED whether we're going to make our courts illegal. All these points have been made. We must stop two-thirds majority. We must improve the quality of our candidates, technical competence, proven capabilities, demonstrable commitment, ethical leadership, strategic thinking, a track record of measurable achievements. The opposition must have credible candidates for president and for parliament. Let us spend some time in choosing our candidates. As we conclude, here's the question. Zimbabwe can be made ready for 2023. History does not have to repeat itself. Elections can solve the national questions. However, there's a caveat. Only if a number of things are done in the next 2 years. Is history about to repeat itself? Not necessarily. If we are wrong, it won't repeat itself. We must resolve the dilemma. It is pivotal for civil society to play its role. There's been a discussion about an electoral Sabbath, avoiding elections, cancellation elections in favor of night path, but unrealistic. It's pie in the sky. It's unrealistic to say you're going to cancel elections and have a national transitional authority. In the context of a military junta, in the context of these amendments, in the context of an overconfident junta, the MDCA and MDC alliances can only be settled by national election. So even the opposition need the national elections. So I want to be very clear on the NTA. Very nice idea, but unattainable. There will be no suspension of elections in 2023. There will be no electoral Sabbath to work on national reforms in Zimbabwe. It will not happen. There will be no national transitional authority in Zimbabwe. A constitutional change is required to do that. Do you expect this junta to give you that change? Not possible. National polarization. And also the nature of the NTA. If it is going to be people who are not politicians, I've strong views that even the opposition won't accept it, but they speak for themselves. So NTA is desirable, but pie in the sky, not feasible. I want to make sure I'm very clear on this so we can do the right things about 2023. Let us make sure we have a transparent election management system. Make sure we defend the vote. Make sure we have political reforms. Make sure we register to vote and then vote and defend the vote. The opposition must understand the strategic value of unity. They must understand the caliber candidates. And this is the end. Lawfare, yes, let us go to court, but we must understand the limitations of the court. Please, corporate lawyers, tell us the limitations of the law. You cannot go to the oppressor's law firm, the oppressor's courts, to ask for justice. Zanla and Zipra fighters did not do that. MK and Apla fighters did not do. How dare you think you can do it if this regime has gone wrong? If this regime now wants an illegal government and an illegal court system, we won't go to that court. We must deploy people power. We must work on political reforms. Women, young people must be the center for our discussion. We must have an ecosystem approach. We must be our own liberators. How? Massive voter registration. How? Massive voting. How? By defending the vote. We the people must become the electoral revolution we seek to see in 2023. I thank you so very much for this opportunity to share with you all.
Professor Arthur Mutambara there, giving us a tour de force on what needs to be done in order to move the electoral needle in Zimbabwe. Truly inspiring, sir, and thank you very much for sharing your insights. Also, Professor Jonathan Moyo, thank you for sharing your insights. Just to note, everybody, we've reached our cap on the Zoom meeting of 500, but don't be discouraged. We have a permanent recording of this dialogue on the Southwest Trust Facebook page, where we're streaming live. So you can go there if you've been unable to get into Zoom. You can also jump on the SAPES YouTube channel. Also check out all of the policy dialogues dating back all the way to 2020, where these discussions around elections, politics, the economy of Zimbabwe and the region are there for you to exploit. But without further ado, let me hand over to some of our discussants. And I'd like to invite Fadzai Mahere to come on here and in a very brief sort of space of time, if you don't mind, Fadzai, please join the conversation. And I'll start off by asking you, in your view, what must be done?
Thank you very much, Chris. It's such a pleasure to be here. And thank you very much to SAPES. I'm here as the spokesperson of the main opposition, the MDC Alliance. I also wear the hat of being a constitutional lawyer. I'm an advocate who practices at the bar. So based on those two portfolios, I do wish to offer some views around what needs to be done. But before I swiftly get to that, I just want to say something about politics and what we value as the MDC Alliance in terms of our political participation. You know, what's happened in Zimbabwe over the years, particularly the last 4 decades, is they removed the people out of politics. If you look at all the energies that are being invested by the state, by the regime, by a lot of politicians, the energies are around tussling for power, the energies around, dismantling the constitution, doing everything they can to repress freedoms, and very little is being done to improve the people's lives. The core thing that needs to be done is to bring the people back to the center of our politics. And, you know, we are, at least in theory, a constitutional democracy. So what that means, if we want to improve people's livelihoods, if we want to make sure teachers are paid, if we want to make sure that we improve the lot of our public health system, modernize our infrastructure, get jobs for the young, and, you know, make sure all people have a pension that's respectable. In other words, giving all Zimbabweans a dignified life, we have to change the political system and the political culture that we have now. So where does that take us? That takes us to a place where, you know, we need to change the regime. And because Zimbabwe is a constitutional democracy, at least in theory, the only way to do that is through an election. Now, that comes to the center of what our conversation is about today. What sort of an election can deliver a Zimbabwe that we can be proud of? A Zimbabwe where everybody is included, where there's freedom, there's fairness, and there's opportunity. And, you know, it's so important that, you know, I emphasize that this is not a question solely for the MDC Alliance or even just for politicians to answer. It's a question that should be exercising every single Zimbabwean's mind. Every single citizen has a responsibility to ensure that they're engaged, that there's no apathy, and they play their part to ensure that the political space is a political space that's truly representative of the people's interests, that we don't let the executive get away with corrupt, repressive, violent, dictatorial conduct. We've seen, as Professor Moyo said, that ZANU-PF, including its proxies, Douglas Munzora and his outfit, are in panic mode. They're desperate. They don't look like a confident, secure outfit that's ready to take on an election. That's why, as Professor Moyo said, we've seen these illegal recalls, the dismantling of the constitution, and the concentration of power in one person, the drama that's taking place in ZANU-PF, the impending and looming patriotic bill, the arbitrary arrest, the shrinking democratic space, you know, the criminalization of opposition politics, and basic rights are under threat. All of this points to a very insecure state apparatus. And, you know, what we've consistently said as the MDC Alliance is that at the core, at the root of Zimbabwe's problems is a legitimacy crisis. And an illegitimacy crisis that stems from a disputed 2018 election. Unfortunately, the illegitimacy crisis is now affecting all other arms of government. We've seen what's happened with Parliament. Parliament is no longer a true expression of the will of the people. We've seen the wanton, illegal recalls and a complete usurping of the will of the people. People were very clear in 2018 around who they wanted to represent them, whether it's in Kuwadzana, whether it's in, all the other places where recalls have taken place. And yet we see the regime blatantly ignoring the constitution, ignoring the will of the people, and just recalling those people, imposing and supplanting their own opposition. Something that is not tenable and that we really need to fight against in the coming election and show our displeasure in a very strong way as the citizen. We've also seen the illegitimacy crisis starting to taint even the judiciary. We've seen what's happened in the magistrates' court, where the right to a fair trial is extremely under threat. We already know the current debate that's taking place around the constitutional amendments that affect the judiciary. We clearly have a problem there. And so this illegitimacy problem is what is at the center of the bad governance crisis that we see in Zimbabwe. Everything else, the poor functioning of the economy, the joblessness, the fact that teachers go to school 2 times a day, the fact that, you go to hospital and you can't get adequate basic health care, all of those are symptoms of a deeper bad governance and illegitimacy crisis that we see. We urgently need electoral reforms. There's no gainsaying this. It's already been said by both our panelists. One of the disturbing aspects with ZEC is that there's been no transparency around a lot of the important national processes that are meant to take place. And as the MDC Alliance, time and again, we've engaged them. What is taking place with delimitation? What is taking place with the census process? All of these are key as we, approach 2023. We need to know what's going on here. And under Section 68 of the Constitution, this cannot be a unilateral process. All stakeholders have to be brought to the table. The citizens need to know what's going on, and there has to be transparency, because we don't want these key national processes, delimitation and the census, to be abused to fortify the rigging machinery in 2023. There's obviously, a whole raft of electoral reforms that are required. I think as the MDC Alliance, we've got a separate policy document called Price, which details and catalogues in great detail all the electoral reforms that are urgent and necessary to ensure that we don't have a repeat rigged election or a disputed election outcome that will lead to more illegitimacy problems. But chief amongst these is that we need to look at the composition of ZEC. ZEC needs to be independent, it needs to be transparent, it needs to be free, fair, efficient, transparent, as I said. These are constitutional imperatives. I think Section 239 of the Constitution is clear around what ZEC should be, and we've seen that ZEC is not that. The influence of the military in the ZEC Secretariat is something that needs to be urgently addressed. There are obviously the reforms that are required around the media space. We've seen the reintroduction of the Border Gezi, National Youth Service. All of that is created, to gear towards a violent election in 2023, something, again, that must be resisted strongly by all citizens. So what is to be done? We need to converge as we all need to come together. And this includes, Professor Mutambara was very clear around the need for the opposition, in other words, politicians to unite. But as far as we're concerned, it goes even further than that. Civic society, the women's groups, the women's movement, the young people, the students' movement, the church, we have to come together and form a broad alliance that's going to really stare dictatorship in the face and resist it and say, thus far and no further. If people power didn't matter, you would not have seen those tanks in 2018. You wouldn't have seen those military tanks in 2019, killing citizens who are trying to demonstrate their constitutional Section 59 right. We would not see the shrinking democratic space. We know that the regime is afraid of what can happen when the citizens and the people come together and say, you know what, this is not the Zimbabwe we want. We want to reclaim the lost Zimbabwean dream and promise. And that's where, all our conversations need to center right now. We know that Zimbabwe Zimbabwe is working for just a few people who are in cartels. The economy and the national cake is something that's only being, eaten and enjoyed by a few. But we know Zimbabwe is extremely well-resourced and rich. So we really have to come together. Obviously, there's need for political leadership, and as the MDC Alliance, we don't shy away from that whatsoever. But what we wish to emphasize is that there's a need for all of us to be engaged. Obviously, the MDC Alliance will provide the necessary leadership. The people are very clear in their support, but let's all come together and ensure that we fight together to win Zimbabwe for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Fadzai, for your input there. I think it's important that we note at this stage that we had invited also a representative from ZANU-PF, and that was in the form of Paul Mangwana, who is Secretary for Legal Affairs in ZANU-PF. Unfortunately, at the last moment, he opted to not participate in this platform. However, we continue to call on our colleagues in ZANU-PF to join in this debate because, as you can hear and see, it is of national and crucial importance. And I think that any solution without the governing party right now, irrespective of questions of their legitimacy, makes a solution difficult to achieve. Let me, in the same breath, invite my colleague, who is also on the line from Good Governance Africa, and her name is Siku Mashingaidze. Siku, would you like to come in and give us what you think needs to happen in order to move things forward in a sustainable manner in Hi, Siku. Are you with us?
Unfortunately,
it appears Siku has disconnected. So in that case, invite in one of our other respondents, if you can pick them up from the floor. I don't know if Justina Mukoko is still on the line with us. Justina. That we are struggling to get some of our to join in the conversation as was anticipated. Interestingly enough, I just see popping up on my screen someone who I'm a big fan of because of insight and intellect, and that's my brother Alex Magaisa. What do you think is the way forward here? What you've heard from Professor Arthur Mutambara, Professor Jonathan Moyo. I'd be keen to hear your view on whether we're taking 2 steps backward and maybe 1 step forward, calling for electoral reform. How is it done of political parties? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chris. I've been listening very patiently and listening with a lot of interest to the presentations by Professor Moyo, Professor Mutambara, and more lately by Fadzai Mahere, speaking for the MDC. All very fascinating. I think they've covered a lot of ground. They've covered a huge ground, and there's no need for me to repeat the things that they have said. Suffice to say that I'm a big fan of, for those who know me, of Sun Tzu, the Chinese, the ancient Chinese general, in the art of war. I read it religiously. One of the things that he said, if you wish to succeed, you must know your enemy. If you know your enemy, you are better off in terms of strategizing in how to handle the enemy. It doesn't matter how much you know of yourself. You should at least invest in knowing your enemy. And that's why I commend, especially the latter part of Professor Jonathan Moyo's presentation, where he made some very important revelations about some of the very basic things that is in order to rig elections, and also Professor Mutambara. These are things that we often say that there is this myth that ZANU-PF does something incredible, something out of this world in order to rig elections. But actually, it uses very basic means. You cannot win an election against any political party, especially a deedless political party, when you don't have polling agents. You cannot do that. It's negligent to do that. And unfortunately, the opposition has committed this act of negligence in previous elections, and I'm aware of that. And so it is very important to invest in that. One of the problems is that you wait until the nomination court, you wait until a few months before the election. You are going to see a flurry of activity in the months leading up to the elections in 2023. And whereas in the years or months before, nothing has been happening. I'll give you an example, Chris, of the constitutional amendment that has just been passed. I despair sometimes, a lot of times I have to say, because when this bill was first gazetted on the 31st of December 2019, some of us went down to write it. I wrote 3 very long articles critiquing that bill, showing the problems of that bill. Now, I don't know how many people read those things, how many people sit down to debate those things. So we have had this amendment for more than a year, and it's only in the last few months, last few weeks, in fact, that people have suddenly popped up and started, we should do this, we should do that. It's almost like, shutting the stable doors after the horses have already bolted. And it's unfortunate, it's a tendency that we tend to have. So I would say that what is very important when you talk about the way forward is you have to invest in knowing and understanding the ZANU-PF. You have to invest in knowing and understanding how it does things. Anticipate their next move. That's why, for me, the issue of this constitutional crisis that we have at the moment, the amendment, there are a lot of other things they've put in there, the sweeteners, like, keeping the women's quota, having 10 MPs for the youth, that's one for every province, which is basically nonsense, which doesn't do anything to empower the youth. And there are many other amendments which are presented as progressive. But in reality, what Emerson Mnangagwa wanted was to capture the Constitutional Court, was to ensure that he has done a favor to the Chief Justice, and that Chief Justice is now beholden to Mnangagwa. And he is very cunning in that he waited until the very last days of the Chief Justice's tenure. When he's nearly 70, when he might or he might not get it, and then he gives it. So the happiest man at the moment is the Chief Justice of Zimbabwe. But let me just also point out something, Chris, as I conclude. Yep. That there are also some fissures which we must be observing in the system. And one of the fissures that I would like people to take note of is what's going on in the constitutional challenge. Right now, we see the Judicial Services Commission, and for the Judicial Services Commission, you must read Chief Justice Malava. They are saying that they don't want one of the judges to be presiding in that case. Not only that, they are also saying that the judge president of the High Court should not be choosing judges to sit on that panel. Now, the judge president of the High Court is George Chiweshe, who would probably have been hoping that with Malava going at his 70th birthday, would also become the new Chief Justice, or at least had a chance to become the new Chief Justice. And now we see these two literally fighting through the proxies. The Chief Justice saying, no, the judge president, his subordinate, should not be choosing judges to sit in a case which ironically involves the people of the Constitutional Court. So I'd like people to take note of that, because Because it's a very fascinating dynamic of what's going on behind the scenes in the political opportunities to be exploited in that as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your contribution there. I'm quite cognizant of the time constraints that we're facing, but as I do so, let me try and squeeze in one or two more of our discussants to help us round off this conversation and maybe help us arrive at what we could describe as a logical conclusion. I was wondering if we have Tendai Dumbuchena with us on the line, and maybe you would like to share one or two thoughts on the discussion today as we begin to round it off. Tendai?
Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you loud and clear. Thanks, Tendai. Go ahead.
The problem of being one of the last speakers is that a lot of your points would have been covered by the previous speakers. But I think it's very, very important for us not to dwell on things that we cannot control, right? Like worrying, agitating for ZANU-PF to effect reforms and things like that. That is not going to happen. We should concentrate on our strengths and what we can do to change the situation. Now, the most critical question to ask is, do Zimbabweans fundamentally desire change? And I am convinced that the majority of Zimbabweans want to bring to an end this nightmare of 40 years of ZANU-PF rule. Now, if that is the case, the next challenge is, how do we translate this desire for change into an electoral victory in 2023? And that is the biggest challenge that we face. Right? We must focus on organizing ourselves, civil society and the political opposition, right? And we should not take the voters for granted. The fact that Zimbabwe is in a mess will not necessarily translate into a vote for change. That vote must be fought for. Right? An electoral defeat of ZANU-PF remains the only viable pathway to change, a realistic pathway to change. Right? The vast majority of Zimbabweans will support a strategic mobilization of the population if it is driven by a seriousness and commonness of purpose currently absent. The notion that people will vote for the opposition because of the horrendous condition the country is in is a mistaken one. Their vote still has to be fought for. They still have to be canvassed and motivated to register, and on their polling days to vote. We have to articulate an alternative vision of for Zimbabwe, and to convince the people that their lives can positively be transformed in a fundamental way by voting ZANU-PF out. Our focus should be on organization and unity within civil society and the opposition. I'm surprised that no one has mentioned the diaspora, because I think if there's one fight that must be fought, and fought very, very hard, if for Zimbabweans in the diaspora to be given the vote. It's ridiculous. Chris, you can confirm this. Ghanaians in South Africa vote during the elections. So do Zambians, so do Malawians, so do Tanzanians. But the biggest group of foreigners in South Africa and Zimbabweans have no vote. It's ridiculous. And I think civil society and the opposition ranks and so forth should agitate for people in the diaspora to be given the vote. So we have to work hard. It is possible. We've seen history that governments armed to the teeth, very strong, who simply refuse to be governed by them. And we must harness that of people for change to get them to the polls. And Professor Mutambara, very, very right to emphasize this point. There must be an overwhelming vote for change to deliver the defeat of ZANU-PF in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my brother Tendai. I think it's probably appropriate at this stage to call back the convener of this dialogue, who is still with us, I hope. Dr. Mandaza, are you still with us, sir? Dr. Mandaza? We're struggling to put a spotlight on him. Maybe while we're trying to get Dr. Mandaza back with us, maybe I could invite, as we conclude, and to help me summarize one of the discussants, who is Jethro Mpofu. Dr. Jethro Mpofu, if you're, maybe you can jump in now and join the conversation.
Thank you, Chris. I hope you can hear me.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Yeah, listening to what our good presenters have given us, first Professor Jonathan Moyo and Professor Mutambara, clearly, an uninvolved listener will think that we are talking about a colonial regime that is operating in Zimbabwe. But it's supposed to be a post-black and liberating government, which means that we are dealing with a native colonialist regime. My observation would be that we, as Zimbabweans, led by the political opposition, this monstrous regime, to monopolize the reputation for danger and to manage to use fear and terror itself as a political resource that comes to use in every other election. It's important that the Zimbabwean political opposition cultivates the political to be dangerous, to be feared by this monstrous outfit, or else we will continue at every election to be elbowed out through the use of violence and Maoist shootings in order to scare the entire population into hiding so that the regime can proceed with its rule with impunity. And I agree with Prof. Mutambara that over the years, over the decades, this regime has been gaining confidence and getting assurance that with Zimbabweans, if you kill 5 of them, they go back into their holes and then we proceed with rule. And I agree with Prof. Mutambara again that we need to think beyond the limits and the perimeters of the law, a lawless outfit. I want to ask Professor Mandaza that can we create a platform? Because I've noticed that most people, such as Jonathan Moyo is saying, and alarmed at the gems and of how election rigging has been taking place in Zimbabwe. Why don't you create a platform in the near future where we discuss Excelgate itself as a text, and we get 1 or 2 or 3 speakers to flesh it out, speakers besides Professor Moyo himself, and just get Zimbabweans to pick up the details of how elections have always been stolen in this country. In my answer to the question of the day, is history going to coming elections? Definitely, given that there is no possibility that the establishment has any political will to change its ways. And look at the biographies. Biographies matter, and womaning this regime. And what are their reputations? What have they done? And what has produced them, and what have they produced? These are murderers. Start with the way they treat their own. Look at the metaphor of how Solomon Mujuru was treated, literally bribing the men for dissenting. Look at how the mother of his children literally roasting her alive. Look at how the Mnangagwa family, its friends, and this internet are monopolizing the Zimbabwean economy, from the mines, from the farms, right up to taxi businesses, right up to Omar. This family, its friends, and its international allies want to achieve monopoly. Expect what form of reform, what positive prospects a collective. So the political opposition, civic society, and this master more political gravitas. What I want to deposit is that ZANU-PF wouldn't be this monster if Zimbabweans did not agree to be the sheep that they are. What these guys are basing their in this political landscape is that they went to the liberation strategy, colonial regime guns, and therefore they are entitled to rule Zimbabwe in perpetuity. What has our generation braved? We sort of love life more than we even fear death. Mother's milk approaches to politics may not be the formula that is going to help us. And Chris and the collective, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think it's really appropriate, without even trying to summarize the depth and today, to try and summarize, except to say that what is quite clear of purpose by opposition and those who would be agents is required. We also clearly see the crucial need for electoral reforms to be introduced really as soon as possible in order to ensure that we do not see a repeat that the speakers have indicated today. So on that note, let me hand over to our convener. I'd like to thank you for joining us. If you'd like to pick up the recording, please go to SAPES Trust YouTube and indeed Facebook platforms where you can pick up the recordings, other various places, including their website, where you can access a recording stage. On that note, I'd like to thank you and wish you a good evening, and hand over at the same time to our convener, Dr. Iba Mandaza. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. But we're still faced with the problematic that we raised in the topic. Is history about to repeat itself again in Zimbabwe? One of the points which was implied, but not clearly in the discussion so far, has been the extent to which elections and the extent to which they are held religiously has tended to legitimize the illegitimate. Now, the elections have become so desperately a necessity for the regime in Zimbabwe to legitimize itself. It appears to me, to the extent that we appear so geared for elections, notwithstanding the dilemma before us, implicitly becomes almost a process of legitimizing that which Jonathan and Arthur Mutambara have outlined in detail. I call this schizophrenia polity. What I call the extent to which that frenzy towards elections is also fed by the international community, the donors, where elections become almost an endless, notwithstanding the risks that I've referred to and which have been outlined in great detail in the course of this session, not to mention Excelgate itself. On the one hand, we have the circular backdrop of the history of disputed elections. We have a coup government and a securocrat state, and yet expect naively that there could be free and fair elections. We have a decimated opposition, a legislature in tatters, a constitution being torn up. We have, as Jonathan Moyo has pointed out, a systematic depoliticization of the population, including ZANU-PF itself. It was a very profound statement and a profound summary of the situation in which we find ourselves. Civil society is immobilized, itinerant at best. And clearly, 2 years away from the elections, it is naive, it's not facile to call for reforms. There will not be any reforms, as Tendai has just said. There is no way there'll be reforms. There is no way that ZANU-PF will allow reforms if reforms are going to make them, to level out the playing field. Impossible. It won't happen. And yet, we have this frenzy, this stampede towards election. So what is to be done? In my view, we have to consider that if elections are going to be held, do we call for UN supervised elections? Chris was right to point out, and someone else earlier, that in a region in which, and in fact a continent in which elections have become a farce, on what basis would you compel the Zimbabwean government to agree to a UN supervised election? Won't. If then you would had to have the same in Uganda. It was the same almost in every country that is holding an election. So we can only argue that the point that should be made. We have a peculiar situation. We have a coup government. We have a government who is tearing up a constitution. We have a government which will not fair elections. And that therefore we must, with due respect to Professor Mutambara, because the elections are not going to be the same. We must consider how, at the national level, we can raise together, as Fadzai has suggested, to create a national consensus which puts pressure on ZANU-PF to come to a conference table. We must to get a mediation process going, because it's almost predictable that we are going to have war in 2023. That elections will be a war zone, perhaps worse than ever before. Because the guys who are there, are not going to give in easily. On a pressing note, we have to say that we have to come back to this topic. And perhaps punctuate the next elections with discussion of this type, if also to raise the consciousness of the problem that Zimbabwe is, In the meantime, is to thank you all and to you out there on Facebook. We have over 1,000, almost 1,500 on Facebook, over 1,000 comments on Facebook. As Chris, we have reached the maximum on Zoom. It is most engaging. And I have to thank Professor Jonathan Moyo and also remind and thank Jonathan for flagging Excelgate in the background as your backdrop. It's a reminder to those of you still on the platform that the book is available. You can get a copy, much cheaper than it was in the first edition. And we'd like to have a launch of it again, if also because of the currency of that book, given the circumstances before us, given the topic before us. I'd like to thank Chris Manolang for doing us proud today. He showed he could have just been as one of us. And the diaspora there, we have about 6 million Zimbabweans out there. They're a major factor. There is no way there'll be a solution in this country without you out there. And we're happy that our policy dialogues so far up of those who participate in these sessions are in the diaspora. Thank you so much. Thank you. Until the next session in 2 weeks' time. And thank you, Fadzai, Tendai, all the other discussants. Alex.
Thanks, Sekuru. Thank you very much.
At Sly Media Productions, we offer live streaming services to companies willing to reach a worldwide audience. We bring you live studio interactive talk shows and interviews.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this live broadcast.
It is sad to note that every day in our local papers, there is a case of rape. Are the current penalties not good enough to stop perpetrators from committing crime?
But as we close, I've also seen or read in the newspapers that there are some people who are leaving your party. Why?
We live stream news press conferences as it happens.
We always last longer because we are revolutionaries, we are guerrillas. And today we have proved that we last longer. These neophytes who were using a marriage certificate of a married woman and a senior old man to try to take power.
Our engagement with ZEC, which is very clear, that ZEC has shown that they are not willing to be open to dialogue. They are stubborn and arrogant. They are opaque in their processes.
We have the capacity to live stream debates from various locations for a wide range of clients.
Welcome to this public seminar that has been organized by the Institute for Security Studies in partnership with SAPES Trust and myself, Violet Gonda. We will start the first half with a question and answer segment where I will ask our panelists some questions, and then in the second half we will actually take questions from the floor, and also if there are any contributions from our viewers at home who are watching on social media, we'll also do the same. We are live streaming on our Facebook, on the Sly Media Productions Facebook page.
So, coming to the issue of elections, there is jurisprudence that election petitions are not decided on numbers only. They are decided on numbers, or they are decided by the environment. If the court finds that the elections were not free and fair, as the first hurdle, the matter must end there, and the election must be vitiated.
the way you see that there was never a plan to win this petition legally is how it was framed. First order that he wanted, a declaration that the election was not free or fair. Second sentence, make me president. How do you do that? If it was not free or fair, how does the court make you president?
We follow them and help build Zimbabwe brand on a positive note. When you think of reaching the ever-growing internet audience with your video adverts, think Sly Media TV Online. If you want to pre-package TV programs, documentaries, weddings and church services, think Sly Media Productions, building bridges. Your TV on the go, anytime, anywhere, worldwide.